Welcome to the Thrive Business Mentorship Podcast with your host, Samuel Robinson, and this week's guest, Hugh Marquis. Hey, Hugh, how are you?
Sammy, I'm doing really well. And you?
I'm doing so good. Hey, first and foremost, thank you so much for being a part of our Thrive Business Mentorship. To all those that are listening, watching, you guys can join us live on Facebook and YouTube, or listen to our brand new podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts. Hugh, I'd love to introduce you here really quickly to all of our viewers. Hugh, I know you're married to Jane and have three beautiful children, Brianne, Savannah, and Owen. You are an experienced entrepreneur, executive leader, speaker, inventor, and social change philanthropist. You and your wife, Jane, have built, transformed, and sold companies spanning many industries, including hospitality, human resources, telecommunications, forestry, and information technology. Wow. And you are currently the CEO of Transformational Leadership Australia. And in 2019, this is the part I'm very excited about, you authored a book, Take Your Framework and Stick It Up Your Pipeline. Love the name, by the way. Finding a New Normal in Business. Hugh, my friend, we are so honored to have you on the broadcast here today. And I know that this is going to be such a, how could I put this? This is going to be such a revelatory time for us. And so, Hugh, let's just dive right into this. Number one, I think the first question that I have to ask you is, what inspired you to write your book and also to name your book, Take Your Framework and Stick It Up Your Pipeline? Can you explain this to all of us that are listening here today?
Sammy, so what inspired me to write my book? God very simply said to me, I want your experiences down in paper. So what you've gone through, what you've lived, and what you've done. And here is the title of your book. So he gave me the title. I went, really? I'm going to write to that? And I guess as an Aussie, there's a bit of sarcasm that has come in that title. Like, you've run business and done other things, and you go into those sales and marketing meetings, and they say, "Oh, we've got to have a pipeline, and we've got to have a framework." And you read these terms that I used to call bingo, like because they're repeating and regurgitating the same old stuff. A bit like some of our politicians right now, but let's not go on that one. They're coming, they're using the same language, and I didn't think they knew what they were talking about. But in having said that, I really struggled writing it, because as I put things down, I had self-esteem challenges. Like, we'd been successful in business, but I'd had self-esteem challenges, thinking, well, if I write it, who's going to read it? And God kept back to me, and he said, I told you to write it. I'll look after the rest. Wow. And then you're putting things down. There are so many business books out there that are collecting dust on people's shelves. Why would one more make a difference? So I had all of those doubts, and what if people didn't like it? What if they didn't like me? All of those things. And then my wife said to me, she said, Jane, and she's wonderful. She said, honey, we're at this point in our life now. Either you're going to write that book or you're going to shut up about it.
Wow.
Okay, right, fine. So we put pen to paper. But as I describe in the book, I'm not a great penner of thoughts. I'd much rather converse with people like this. And so what I had was some friends who would interview me, basically, in cafes, in restaurants, in bars, what have you, lots of noise and babies around and all sorts of crazy things. And then we took all of the thoughts from the interview, and I had a ghostwriter, Renee Getney, who was amazing, bringing all of those things together and into a readable fashion. The irony is now I've got people that said, why don't you put it on Audible? And I went, well, just go and listen to those tape recordings on it.
Hugh, I have to say, I reading your book, I think coming out of the whole book, and I want to encourage all of those that are listening to this to make sure to get a copy of this book, because on a couple of notes. Number one, how insightful and well-rounded the book is, but also too, it's fascinating, and I want to talk about this because throughout the book you made a very very interesting statement, and you talked about our current business culture, and that in that culture, Hugh, there was aspects of greed, fear, and corruption. I think we can all say we've seen that in some form in business to some degree. And maybe even right now, Hugh, in the climate that we're in, we're probably seeing it even more so. Could you expound on this? Because I found it so fascinating how you highlighted these three areas. And I really believe it's significant to get an understanding if we're going to do business a different way. I feel like these elements that you're talking about need to be talked about. And so could you kind of bring us through a little bit of your thought process of
Sure.
those things in business?
I will see. What I talk about is moving from a culture based around greed, fear, and corruption to one that is based on caring, sharing, and prosperity.
Love it.
For greed, fear, and corruption is all around self-centeredness.
Yeah.
It's what can I get out of a situation? How does my business prosper? How do I win? And traditionally in the world, it's I win, you lose type environment for us to win, because we live in this the world's economy, which is limited. It says there's only enough to go around. No,
Mm,
well, there's not enough to go around. So someone's got to lose if someone's got to win. So the world, if you look at any business deal, the majority of business deal, it's about someone winning, someone losing. If you look at your sports competitions through America,
it's
someone
true.
winning, someone losing all the time. It is, we've got this competition that's happening to make somebody win and somebody lose. And I believe that God's plan is totally different than that. It's inverted. If I put it in an analogy, in business, I asked my sister and my brothers, we sat around, siblings around the table, I said, what is the responsibility of the employee in a business? And there was some interesting discussion coming around. And my sister sits on a bit left aside politics than I do, whatever, but that's okay. And the conversation went around. And then I said, I think it's the responsibility of the employees to make profit for a company. And she said, that's crazy. That's nuts. And I said, hang on, what's the other side? What's the responsibility of the employer? And we discussed that. And I said, my thought is it's the responsibility of the employer to look after the well-being and welfare of the employee. Now, we've actually got it the wrong way around, because the companies are looking out after profits. The
Yeah.
employees are looking out after their own welfare. So they're always at odds and fighting each other. Now, if you flip that culture, you've actually got one where both are working together for each other's best.
I love it.
And that's what I'm talking about in flipping the culture, from greed, fear, and corruption. In every deal that you do, look at it and say, is there greed? Is there fear? Is there corruption? Are any of those things evident in what we're doing? And can we turn it around? Because if we can turn it around, we're going to flip the culture to something that is better, which hence take your framework, the way we have thought. And, and so the funny part about it, finding a new normal in business, this is written in, the book was published at the end of 2019, before coronavirus came out. And I went, oh, a book for a time such as this.
Absolutely. And Hugh, I would say this too. What you just said is so impactful right now, just for society, that we're living in a time right now where you said, companies are looking for profit. And then you have employees looking for their own benefits. And if what would it look like to flip that script? I find that absolutely fascinating, Hugh. And I want to talk about this because you use these very principles in your own company. I know that you have an amazing God story about launching, if I'm not mistaken, an IT business called Network Neighborhood. And I know it came through this beautiful God story. Could you share about this and And I know this could be a long story, but if you could give us kind of the Reader's Digest version of this, this God idea business, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, I'll give you the cliff notes because
Yes.
that's how I used to read books.
Me too.
So back in 1999, so before the Y2K bug, I just had this God encounter, and he said, "I want you to build a business." I said, "Awesome." So, and I start writing everything that I see, and I build a 15-year business plan,
Wow.
right, with what turnover would be, what. But the start of the journey, he showed me something like this. Now, I didn't invent the iPhone, guys. Didn't do that, right? But he showed me this, and he showed a picture of an 8-year-old girl walking through the schoolyards with a little tablet sort of device that she
Wow.
could get her lesson plans on and get her stuff. But because both of her parents were working, they couldn't see her sister's sports day. So she went out and was videoing out on the sports field and getting a live feed to her parents so they could see the sports day interactively. This is a picture I got on what to build. Right, so I knew that these devices were coming. Bear in mind, the iPhone got invented 2007, 8 years later.
Wow.
Right now, I knew this was coming and said, well, we're going to have the infrastructure and support in schools to make this happen. So I've got this idea. It's crazy idea. I go to my pastor. I take it to him, hoping he would talk me out of it. Right? So my pastor, Peter McHugh from Stairway Church, brilliant man. He looks through it. I tell him the dream, looks through the plan. He says, this sounds crazy. Sounds like God. You should do it. And I'm going, oh, really? And then the testing came because, I wrote to the government and said, schools are going to need infrastructure. They're going to need this. They're going to, and a white paper on how to bring that all together. And nothing, nada. Nothing. I'm thinking, oh, this is crazy. Maybe I've misheard. And at that time, I got offered a job to work in a recruitment company as a state manager. And in year 2000, they were offering me $250,000.
It's a great wage.
It's a great wage. On one hand, am I going to believe what God's told me and a vision He's given me, or am I going to go with an easy out, so to speak, and do that? I chose with $17,000 in the bank to do what God said. 3 months later, there comes out a public tender to provide support and build support infrastructure in schools. It was word for word the white paper that I'd written to the government, including all my spelling mistakes. I haven't changed a thing, right? So we applied, and because you have to tender for a certain amount of technicians and engineers, we applied and we got 5 positions.
Wow.
So I had a guy that I was working with. We had 3 others. So I worked as a tech. He worked as a tech. We started building the infrastructure, and the business kept growing. It kept growing, and we didn't spend anything on marketing. We didn't spend anything on recruiting staff. They would come to us, and we would start getting more tenders and more resources. And then schools who loved what we were doing put it in. We became the test bed for wireless technology in schools.
Wow.
So we help create that. We help create platforms for people to host online learning. Now, you look at the last year that we've just gone through, everyone's been learning from home.
My daughter, Hugh, was just learning from home on her computer. This is absolutely fascinating. Wow.
Yeah. Right. So this was stuff that we dreamed about 20 years ago.
Wow.
And we put in place. And it was crazy. Then there was times that you'd sit and I pray and say, God, what am I meant to do about this next bit? Because as we were growing, government got a little bit cautious, saying, you're 50% of our business. What if your business falls over? And I'd say, well, are we doing a good job? Yeah. Are the schools happy? Yeah. Are we saving you money? Yeah. What is your problem here? But, it's bureaucracy. You get that. But praying, and I'd come up with an idea of adding support services in, but saving the government $15 million.
Wow.
Right, in the process, just a change in the way they structured. And I kept getting blocked by secretaries to the minister. Couldn't get to him. And I'm saying, God, what do I do about it? He said, I want you in the government buildings on this day at this time. Okay. So I did that. get there, and I'm just sitting in the foyer because I didn't have an appointment with anyone. The Minister for Education comes in, but his security card wouldn't work. And he's trying to get the security card to go through the swipes, and it wouldn't work. And the security guard can't open. And he said, I've just got to go and get something else. He turns around and sees me. He said, hi, Hugh, because we've met. We're talking. He said, what are you doing here? He said, I'm here, obviously, to meet you. And he said, I'm not in your diary. He said, you're not in my diary. And I was going, nope, I've been trying for months, and I can't get in your diary. Well, what do you want to talk about? I gave him the plan. He said, that's brilliant. That's going to save us money. Bang. They implement the idea. We grew overnight.
Wow.
But, it was all of these connections, but we could put it down to from the day we started to the day I bought my business partner out. Again, we'd gone to a prophetic day, and I've been praying. My partner and I were going in different directions. He wanted to back down. I wanted to grow the business. And a prophet in the house for our church, we had a business meeting. He looked at me and said, you've been praying this morning? I said, yep. And he said, God says two things. You know how much you have to pay, and you know what you need to do.
Come on.
So I get up and I walk out. The rest of the people in the prophetic thing think, how rude is he? The prophet's in there, and I'm pacing out the front of the building. My first phone call, they could see me through the window. My first phone call to Jane is, Jane, we're going to buy the company out today. She said, okay. I told her how much. She said, that's all the cash we've got. And I said, I know, but we need to do it. Wow. I ring my business partner and said, Norm, we're going in different directions. I want to buy the company. I want to offer you this much money. He said, fine, done. That was it. End of negotiation. Done deal, sold. We became 100% owner of the company. Now, we bought it, but I used all the cash we had. So we had no reserves. Right? And so we went backwards for about 8 months as we're trying to build cash reserves again, because I had a goal that I would have at least 6 months' wages for all of our staff sitting in a bank reserve. That was fun. And then from that point, after we started getting back on top, we doubled again, doubled each year for 6 years in the business. Right? It just kept growing until God said, okay, I want you to lay that down and then go and teach all the lessons you've learned. Now, can you imagine? No. You've got this business that's making very good money, very profitable, and God says, I want you to lay it down. I'm going to coach you to sell it.
Hugh, it's almost like having a baby. It's, you got it out of the diaper stage, and now it's kind of walking on its own. It's got personality. And I wanted to jump in on this because I really believe with what you just said with laying it down, and even talking to you a little bit about success here, because we've talked about this before. And, I've told you a little bit about, what I do with professional athletes, and I help coaching there and do chaplaincy. And one of the things we always talk about is the fleetingness of success, or the misconception of success.
Yep.
Because Hugh, why on earth in the natural would you give up on a successful, cash flow positive, money making company that's got a great story behind it? I guarantee you it probably brought on a world of connections and a world of possibilities, and in the world's eyes, and I know this is a faith-based podcast, but so often we look at things like, oh, I just want to have that successful business, or I just want to have that next successful story. Hugh, how do you process that? Like, I'd love to get into your thinking, and what's your definition of success and some of those things?
So for me, for such a long time, success was about the house I lived in, the cars I could afford to drive, the clothes I could afford to buy, the purses I could buy my wife, the restaurants I could eat out at, the holidays I could take, the trips I could do.
Wow.
But really, when you've got the house and you've got the cars and you've got maybe a boat or a plane, I haven't got either of those, but when you've got all of that and you can choose to eat where you want to eat, well, that makes success then, well, what does that really mean? And so I changed from a very material success, greed, fear, and corruption, which is what it is, because I was looking about my interest, to a success of my success now is, how do I help others achieve what they need to achieve? How do I allow myself to be that stepping stone that people can stand on my shoulders and make great leaps and be super, super successful. Learning from the experiences I've learned, doing, that I'm not saying they don't have to do hard yards. If they're going to run a business, they will do hard yards.
Yeah.
But it's now putting yourself a lot lower to serve others, for them to be better. For me, is watching my kids be all that they can be, and to serve community, and to serve people, and to serve people well. That caring, sharing, and prosperity for all. So my definition changed from self-focused to being community-focused, to being relational with people, to helping them be who they're meant to be.
Wow, Hugh, this is so good. I know for me, I'm learning so much, and I appreciate your number one, your transparency. I think sometimes when it comes around success, um, success can almost feel like a drug, Hugh. I don't know if you've
Oh
ever,
yeah,
you know
yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean? It's almost like you're looking for that next, high of success.
Mhm.
And unless you get grounded, and this is probably my favorite chapter in your book. I want to dive into this because I know for those that are listening to this, many of us, we struggle with this. I want to talk about, in chapter 3, you eloquently talk about owning your stuff,
Yeah.
and you actually get quite transparent. And,
Mhm.
we all love to talk about our successes. We all love to talk about, try to put our best foot forwards. There's many books out there, Hugh, that are about, first impressions, here's how you talk to people. These are the highlights you share. But many times, though, we struggle with the aspect of failure, or we
Yeah.
struggle with the aspect of weakness. And I love, one of the things I loved about your book was you were very transparent about your own life, your own personal issues, and how to own those things. Could you kind of dive in with our viewers today? Because I feel like there's so much great content, especially on this area of owning your stuff.
Okay, well, there's a couple of things that, and I talk about it in the book. And if my wife Jane was here with me now, she would be in agreement on those things. That, I've had spectacular successes in
Mm,
business. I've also had spectacular failures.
yeah.
You know,
Wow.
even through the successes, I felt I wasn't good enough. I felt that I wasn't achieving enough. I wasn't a good enough dad. I wasn't a good enough husband. I wasn't a good enough
Wow.
provider. And and so a couple of things happened. I didn't love myself, and I didn't love myself well. So I
Wow.
went looking for love in all the wrong places. And I ended up having an affair and cheating on my wife. Right. And it could have ruined and done our marriage.
Wow.
Jane is an amazing woman. That after that happened, I went to her and apologized and asked for forgiveness. And we've walked through a journey of forgiveness. There wasn't immediate healing. It was a struggle to get through. It was a struggle that could have torn us apart and could have done so many different things. Right. But we didn't. We stayed the course. We worked through it. We worked through some of our issues. Now, it took me a lot longer to work through my issues. Jane forgave me, but I had to learn through that. There was also another period that, again, just still feeling that I wasn't worth enough, that I went to the gun safe and took a loaded gun.
Wow.
And if anyone's listening to this podcast and you're thinking that, seriously, go and get some help. Get some people around you and get some help. But I took a loaded gun and put it in my mouth and pulled the trigger, and it misfired.
Wow.
And I'm here today because God didn't want me to go.
Come
Because
on.
And people say, well, Hugh, how can you be transparent about this? So, because my stories, my stuff, my failures, I'm through those and I'm forgiven. But I need to tell them because I know it could be helping one other person. It could be helping one person in this podcast that's thinking, it'll be okay, I'll have an affair. No, don't put yourself in that position. Or I'm not feeling good enough and I want to take my life. So there's some of the issues. I also had to deal with a very real anger issue. I had what I called a Zorro Complex, little black mask, black cape. And when I got angry, I would have the sword and go, and I'd have dead bodies all around me where I would attack people.
Wow.
And I had to learn that wasn't the right behavior. I was okay, I recovered, but there were people that I hurt in the process. And I've since learned how to apologize, ask for forgiveness for that, and how to control my anger. I've got books in my library of how to control anger. None of those worked, but I did find a way that worked, and that's yeah. So I've got stuff like that where I've had to learn from others and to develop and change. So it hasn't been, oh, look at that, he's successful all the way through. And then when I sold the company, right? So people would say, and there was I think there was a bit of ego creeping into me
Yeah.
because we were number one in the industry. We were
Wow.
recognized around the world. It was phenomenal time. But when I sold and I'm on a plane flying somewhere, people say, what do you do? Well, I'm the CEO. Oh, no, I'm not the CEO of that anymore. What do
Wow.
you do now? I share people a story that I hope they will get a lot of hope out of and they'll become better. So it was when I sold the company, you said it's like a child. It was the same emotion as walking my eldest daughter down the aisle to get married.
Wow.
I'd taken something that I'd sown so much into and handing it to someone else. And it was like, wow. And I didn't understand there was a grieving process that I had to go through at the end of selling the business. So, yeah.
Wow. Hugh, I know we're already 26 minutes in here, and I have a million and one questions. We need to do another podcast, my friend, together on this, just because, when you talked about coming out of the spotlight, in my field, work with athletes, we usually call that the spotlight syndrome,
Yeah.
where all of a sudden you're on TV all the time, people see you, your face, and no matter how much, we say we don't notice it. At some degree, whether it's subconsciously or consciously, we do notice it.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how you said it. And I'd love to maybe end with this question, Hugh. And it's a little bit different because of the fact that with your experience of starting successful companies, now you're inspiring people all over the world. You're working with different governments. You're working with different CEOs. I would love to ask you this question on a very practical level. If you were looking at let's say a young Hugh, let's say like a 20-year-old Hugh, and you're looking at yourself with all the expertise that you have walked through, and I'm not just talking the success, I'm talking the failure, the process, the wear and tear of life, with everything that we've just talked about, what would be that one key of wisdom that you would say, hey, listen, if I could take this one aspect, if you could get this is really going to help you moving forwards with you and with everything that you're going to put your hand to, what would that be, Hugh?
Did God say do it?
Can you explain on that? Because that's really good. And
Right.
I know we only got a couple minutes, but let's talk about
Okay, so have a look at that picture behind me. There
Yeah.
is a man on his knees praying and to be crowned. See, if you go in and build a business, you can build it without God. But I've found that if I want to be that successful, I have to align my plans with his plans, not trying to say, God, would you bless me? Would you bless my business? Would you feed me? Will you do that? The question is, God, what can I do to serve you? What do you want me to do?
Wow.
Now, when I've been counseling people with a business and they're saying, oh, look, I've started this business, it's doing this, but it's not going really well. I ask, did God say to do it? Well, no. Okay, should we go back to the beginning then and ask God? Because if you're going to do something and God's not saying to do it, you're going to battle 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
There'll be the rare occasion that you won't. So going back to, well, God, should I be doing this? And it says, with the counsel of many, there is wisdom. So when you do get that, as then go to your people around you, your close friends, those who love you enough to tell you when it's a bad idea, or those that love you enough to tell you when it's a good idea, and get advice from them. Did God say do it? I've found that every time I do it when God says to do it, it works.
Wow.
But if he doesn't, I may have to battle harder.
Guys, this has been so good. Hugh, we need to get you back on again. I know for me, this has been so
Sammy, can I do a
Yes.
shameless plug? Because
Yes.
you didn't hold the copy of this up.
Please
Well,
do. Yeah, pull it over. There we go. And
There we
guys,
go.
I want to say this again just before we end, is that I want everybody listening to this, you need to get this book, take your framework and stick it up your pipeline. I know that this will be a revolutionary book for so many people. So again, Hugh, thank you so much for your time, my friend, and I'm looking forward to seeing you soon.
Sammy, thank you. I appreciate being with you. I appreciate who you are and what you do.
Thank you very much, my friend. All right, guys, we will see you later.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. Thrive Podcast is produced by Voice of Revival Ministries. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and other social media platforms. Visit voiceofrevival.ca/thrive for other connecting opportunities. Music produced and performed by Corey Mullen.